Thank you so much, Ambassador, for allowing us to speak to you about this important program. Now, this is the first time in-person meeting of the United Nations high level since the outbreak of COVID. Just how important is it that the UN is able to again gather together in this manner?
It is very important. It is not lost on member states, on the UN itself, that the last time we met was in 2019. Of course, last year there was a gathering, but as you know, it was very limited. There was limited access to the UN itself, and the agenda was shortened. So it is important that we meet this time. And testimony to that is the number of heads of states and heads of government that have confirmed to participate in the UN UNGA 77th session. We're talking about 140 plus heads of government and states that will be participating in this in UNGA 77th session.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And how important is it that the United Nations needs to lead on the COVID-19 recovery?
Okay. It is important. It is the UN. If you think about it, this is a body, a multilateral body, the multilateral body that brings all of us, member states, to come together, to collaborate, to cooperate, to work on challenges that are facing the world today. So those challenges that we know that no one single country can deal with. And therefore it is important. And it goes back to your first question. Part of why it's important that we are able to come together in this UNGA High Level Week is because of the multiplicity of challenges that we know are out there. And therefore, those should be addressed in this high level week, in this session. COVID, yes. With COVID specifically, we still have to deal with the recovery from COVID, the impact of COVID on livelihoods, on people and their livelihoods. We still have to deal with that. We know that the recovery was not the same across the world, across the globe. Developing countries suffered the most and are still reeling from that unfortunate disaster. So it's important that we deliberate during this high level week on that recovery that is uneven.
Mm-hmm. From COVID now to peace and security issues that I know the United Nations has been vested in now. There's a meeting that obviously will continue to look at conflicts that has been raging on, Ukraine, other parts of the world as well. Conflicts still rages on as well. That will the United Nations be looking at that specifically on this week?
Yes, it's important. As you know, the focus of the UN, the creation of the UN was to prevent future wars, future conflicts, and really focus on Pacific settlements of conflicts. So a meeting and a gathering of our leaders, of global leaders, just has to focus on that and give that attention. And I think it'll be in this space that countries like ours, like South Africa, will be able to send out a message about the importance of cooperation in dealing with global conflicts. We spoke about COVID earlier, but conflicts, COVID, all of those are really impacting negatively on people. And it's important that, as you know, there are conflicts raging, not only in Ukraine. There are ongoing conflicts in our continent, in the Middle East. The last meeting of the Security Council focusing on conflict was on Friday, and this was in Europe between Azerbaijan and Armenia. There too. So right across the globe, you still have conflicts that needs attention and that needs to be focused on. So we have to remind ourselves here at the UN, in the Security Council, that there's a need to focus on all conflicts equally and try and address those equally as well.
Talking about attention now, the attention that has been given to the reform agenda of the United Nations Security Council, but the UN itself as well. Any progress on that?
It is an interesting area. There's a need for the reform of the Security Council. We've been saying that for a long time now. Every year there is intergovernmental negotiations on this particular issue, the reform of the Security Council specifically, and enlarging the Security Council so that it reflects the diversity of member states today, so that other geographical members are represented in the Security Council, as you will know, that especially the permanent 5. So of course you'll have the elected members coming from across the globe, but in the P5 it doesn't really reflect the world today, contemporary. So it's important that there is reform. So every year we take out time to discuss this issue. The positions are still entrenched. Those that do not want to see reform are still there. Those that are progressive and want to see reform also are pushing for that. South Africa is one of those, together with other member states. And what has shifted though has been the acceptance that the African continent and its position, the Ezulwini Consensus and the SETED Declaration have been accepted by the broader membership. So if you look at, as we negotiate, what are the areas of convergence and what are the areas of divergence, the one area of convergence across all the different groups on Security Council reform is accepting the Ezulwini, the common African position as articulated in the Ezulwini Consensus and the SETED Declaration. So that is an area of conversion. As to where the expansion of the Security Council should happen, whether in the elected category or in the permanent category, that's where we differ. And the other second issue is the veto, the question of the veto. If you expand the Security Council, will you then, that veto, will it be given to the new members of the Security Council? So those two issues are still, that's where member states are still not. There are areas of divergence that we still have to discuss. But of course, the other important thing that you will have heard us talk about more and quite often is the fact that as we are negotiating on the Security Council reform, it is important that we begin to document what we are talking about, to document what the areas of convergence are, what the areas of divergence are, and we refer to that as text-based negotiations. Right now, we are talking year in, year out, but it is not text-based. So we don't have a negotiating text that is in front of all of us, that we are negotiating from a common text and we move and tick as we go paragraph by paragraph. None of that is happening, and ordinarily that's how we negotiate here at the UN. So South Africa and many other member states are calling for text-based negotiations so that we can see progress on this issue. Otherwise we come back, repeat our positions year in, year out, without really seeing much progress. So we're really pushing for text-based negotiations on the Security Council reform. And of course on reform of the entire UN system, that has also been articulated when in 2019 when the leaders met. This was at the 75th anniversary of the UN. Time to pause and reflect on, is this the UN that we want, the UN that we need, the UN that can carry the multilateralism that we require so much, and of course that led to a number of commitments from the member states side in terms of how do we improve multilateralism, but also from the UN system itself. How does it begin to respond better? How does it begin to support member states better? And how does it begin to do things differently wherever the agencies are? So that is ongoing work as we speak. So yes, the Security Council, but also the UN as a whole, so that we have a modern day UN that is alive to the challenges that we are facing.
Ambassador, the modern day UN obviously has its history where South Africans continue to participate in. Can you talk to us about the UN system and the number of institutions that are there supporting its work? In terms of are South Africans represented? Do they continue to take positions of leadership, but also play an important role where South Africa is recognized as a very important player on global governance?
Yeah. Yes, there are. the UN organization is quite huge, really, and allows for. And I mean, today we're talking about as we reform the UN, looking at a networked, inclusive, and effective UN. Networked multilateralism, meaning that you begin to allow other players to be part of addressing the challenges that we need to address. So the modern UN will allow and realize that, yes, member states are negotiating and member states are taking the decisions. However, you do have other important players that contribute to the solutions that we come about. We're talking here about civil society, the importance of the role of civil society, and South Africa continues in this environment to talk about the importance of civil society to be included in UN processes. The importance of academia, the importance of the private sector. We are playing a leading role in the Peace Building Commission. That's one body where South Africa participates quite actively. In fact, we are now a member of the Peace Building Commission. And in the Peace Building Commission, we have broad focus on, the Peace Building Commission focuses on post-conflict areas, on fragile states. And we're saying that the private sector should and must contribute to peace building in post-conflict situations. They benefit in peaceful societies, and therefore they must really contribute to the creation of peace, to the sustaining of peace. So we've introduced here, together with our partners, the concept of peace-positive private sector development. So we've brought that into the system, and now it's something that the Peace Building Commission is looking at, and we're really looking at a space where we can develop norms for the private sector to get involved in post-conflict areas. There are enormous opportunities. We see private sector getting in, but how must they get in? They must get in a manner that promotes peace instead of putting those countries back to where they were before. So the peace building is one organ. The other, of course, the primary organ is the General Assembly, where you have all member states being represented, including us. And in the General Assembly, this is where we deliberate. That's the main policy deliberation body of the UN. And we contribute quite substantially to that. We have led resolutions, raised resolutions in the General Assembly itself. We also play a leadership role in connecting the Peace Building Commission and the General Assembly. So South Africa is the coordinator between those two bodies. There are 6 committees of the General Assembly. And in those 6 committees of the General Assembly, South Africans play different leadership roles. The staff here in the South African Permanent Mission of the UN are playing different roles. They are facilitating resolutions. They are coordinating different groups. So let's say the Africa group and there's a particular focus, let's say it's financing for development, you will find a colleague, Soraya Jacobs, leading that, or for G77 plus China. You look at the first committee, which is around issues of disarmament, and again there we have South Africans here at the mission playing important leadership roles in that first committee for different issues. Our DPR, Deputy Permanent Representative, is the chairperson of the Disarmament Commission. Same as our other colleague Yasin, who is also playing some coordination role. So every committee, there are 6, from first committee to the 6th committee, we have South Africans that are in the permanent mission, but also at head office, playing leadership role in one way or the other, coordinating work in those different committees. What does that mean? It means that as South Africa, we are contributing to the system, to the UN system. Because remember, these committees are committees of the UN, of the General Assembly. So we are contributing to the functioning of the UN system. But at the same time, of course, we are advancing our values as reflected in our constitution. And what we value so much, it flows through into the work of those committees. So while we are assisting the system, we are also making sure that our values of equality, of freedom, of justice are infused into the resolutions that are coming out of all the bodies. I myself was the chairperson of the Commission on the Status of Women, and I continue be taking on the second year chairing that particular commission. We are also leading on pandemic prevention, preparedness and response. So here we're looking at future pandemics, and South Africa here at the UN is leading in terms of how we channel the focus on that particular issue and make sure that we do not experience what we experienced last time with COVID, how the world responded and how the developing South was left behind. This time around, making sure that there's proper preparedness for future pandemics, which are definitely going to happen, but they should find us ready, in fact. So that will be the General Assembly. Then you have the Human Rights Council. The work of the Human Rights Council largely happens in Geneva. So Ambassador Ngosi anchors that work. However, once the resolutions all come back to New York to be adopted here in New York, some of the resolutions in one of those committees of the General Assembly. So we have to work very closely with our colleagues in Geneva when those issues come through. Similarly with Vienna, where issues of disarmament actually is happening in Vienna, nuclear non-proliferation treaty being managed there and other issues, they also come through back to New York. So we have to work very closely with the ambassador in Vienna. Then another important body, in fact, here and it's New York work. It's the ECOSOC, the Economic and Social Council. Quite important. This is where we take care of all the development issues, all the issues that we care about so much in South Africa. When we talk about our triple challenges, those are being fleshed out. Those are being engaged with. We're seeking common solutions in the ECOSOC is the body that deals with it. If we look at financing for development, when we look at illicit flows of finance, it's all the SDGs, let me put it that way, all the Sustainable Development Goals from 1 to 17. The ECOSOC deals with all of those. And as we speak today, there was a meeting that is called the SDG moment, where we pause and say, how are we doing on the SDGs? And as you will know, we're not doing very well. But our minister, Gumbele, has been quite active in this space to bring in the view of South Africa as far as SDGs are concerned. For the first time, we're having an education summit during the high-level week to focus on how are we dealing with education, especially post COVID. How do we recover? Learning recovery. How do we begin to address the issues of digitization to assist education? So it's a host of issues around education, lifelong learning. So all the SDGs are being dealt with in that body called the Economic and Social Council. So those are, I've just lifted some of the key organs of the UN, but there are many other where Kenyans and South Africans are represented. And I'm talking, when I say South Africans are represented, I mean there are South Africans that are serving in these bodies as special rapporteurs, as coordinators, not South Africans in the mission, but these are professional South Africans that are coming from South Africa and doing work in those bodies. Yeah.
And those expert panels are being supported by the mission as well.
Yeah, because so here's the point: when you deploy South Africans into international organizations, remember that Cabinet approved a framework for deployment of South Africans into international organizations, right? And they can be deployed in different capacities. The one that some of us feel passionate about is how can we get young people into international organizations, into the UN, into other multilateral bodies as intense, and because it starts there and they grow in this multilateral system. So we develop strategies for that. And you can also deploy South Africans into the system through secondments or through candidatures where they become judges and so forth, or through when they become civil servants of the UN. They call them international civil servants. So there, South Africa supports, and hence we have that framework that supports. But at the same time, you give space. So if it's an international civil servant, you also give space for them to do what they have to do. But there is still a relationship. But there's a professional distance, if I may to call it, but they know what to advance, they know what to promote as much as their civil servant, because in the multilateral system, after all, the values should be the same. It should be about cooperation, collaboration towards common solutions and dealing with common challenges. So that's how we and really it's an area where it continues to receive focus from the government of South Africa to make sure that we have South Africans that represent, that are there in all these organs, in the expert panels, in the international, even your IMFs, your World Banks, the IIEA, whichever, all the agencies, but not only in the headquarters of these agencies. We should also look for opportunities for South Africans in the field, in peacekeeping operations, in the UN DP, the resident system where you have the UN DP together with UNICEF and other agencies being on the ground. We must have South Africans serving in those capacities as well. Yeah.
Let me thank you so much for your time, Ambassador.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Good.
Ambassador.
Yeah.